This clip is brought to you by VegasWinners.com. Get expert sports betting advice from some of the best handicappers in the world. Head on over to VegasWinners.com and win yourself some money.
Let's mention Steve wrote in his book. So I was getting paychecks from Jarrett, but I wasn't getting them as often as I would have liked. But I thought I was doing a good job in the ring, and finally asked Jerry when he was going to book me full time. Jerry said, quote, "Hell, Steve, I think you're ready now." You were seeing some of what Chris was doing. Did you agree with your dad that Steve was ready?
So put it in context. The short answer is absolutely. But you got to remember in Memphis or wherever, being ready is relative. But Steve stood out so much in his wrestling school class that absolutely he was ready. And I vividly remember Chris sort of laying out the storyline that he wanted to propose to do, because it was just so unique that, hey, here's a student, and I was just enthralled by it. He wanted to bring in the mentor mentee, whatever you want to call it, the Bruno Zbyszko storyline. But it was just really cool that, okay, we're going to head down this road. And then where it led was it was you talk about blurring the lines, and so relatable with wives and ex-wives and Tony Adams and Gene Clark, and, Steve and Gene ended up getting married, but just the genesis of all that and how it was working. And so, yeah, Steve obviously was, I'm assuming he put it in his book, but he was married and he was working on a loading dock, and he loved this business and wanted to get into it and had a passion like so many other of us young guys that, man, let's do something fun. Let's do something that energizes me. I don't want to punch a time clock, period.
So he starts working full time for the first time in his career in Memphis for your dad. He's working as Steve Williams. And at this point, before Dutch Mantel renames him Steve Austin, that's a story that everybody knows, but he's still Steve Williams at first. Dutch renames him. Our boy Bruce tells a story on Woo Nation, my very first podcast with the Nature Boy Ric Flair. And
so Bruce was the guest.
Yes,
I got you. I just making sure that I understood this.
And as the legend goes, Steve had worked a long time, very hard, to try to figure out how to just make a living out of this thing. At times, he couldn't afford to get a hotel room. He's sleeping in his car. Other times, he's just living on cans of tuna and raw potatoes. And he's behind on rent, probably going to get evicted, but really believes there's something to this. And he's just tickled that now he's got the opportunity to work 7 days in a week. Instead of getting booked here or there and not being able to eke out a living, this could finally be the big break. He got it. He's a full-time wrestler. And he gets his first check. He's all excited. I'm finally going to get to eat something besides cans of tuna and raw potatoes. I'm not going to be able to, or be forced to sleep in my own car. I'm going to be able to make rent. I'm going to do it, man. This is it. He tears that envelope open, and he's shocked at what he sees. And he just stares at it. And you can almost hear an exhale. The disappointment is just written all over his face. And around that time, the promoter's son, who quote unquote grew up in a 20,000 square foot house, comes strutting by.
Should I be humming Simply Irresistible right now?
Slaps him on the back and says, "Keep on staring at it, boy. It ain't going to make it no bigger." That's the way Bruce has heard it. I've heard other people say the words were a little different, but the gist is the same. Stare at it all you want. It won't get any bigger. Ha ha ha. Slap him on the back. Now, the context of that is important. because everyone sees you as the promoter's boy, aka he didn't earn nothing. He was born on third. He's spoiled. Look at the quote unquote, the guy who's screwing me. This is his son. And he's going to wake up tomorrow in this mega mansion and just get to run roughshod around here and do whatever he wants. That's the perception. Now, is that reality? Probably not. We've talked about that before. As soon as you started wrestling, you had to find your own place, et cetera, et cetera. But I also want to add the context of you're very, very young. How old would you guess you were there?
21, 22.
And a lot of people listening to this are my age. They're 40 years old, and we think we got life figured out now, but boy, we knew we had life figured out when we were 21.
Yeah. And Steve's a few years older than me.
And so now there's this younger kid coming behind you, slapping you on the back after you've been chasing your dream, sleeping in your damn car, probably got a crick in your neck, probably hungry as hell, literally. And it happens. And supposedly that's a story that, now let's add the context here. Was Bruce in Memphis? No. Was Bruce in Texas? No. Was Bruce in the same state that show happened in that day where Steve's in the backstage area and opens that envelope? No. So who told him that story? Stone Cold Steve Austin. And of course, he told him that story once he was the biggest star in the business. Let's clear up the rumor and innuendo. Did this happen? Did you make that comment to Steve, slap him on the back? Do you remember this interaction or exchange?
I absolutely, positively, without question, did it. No, of course I do. I remember it vividly. And let's go down the story behind the story, because, you know, the name of Dwayne Johnson's production company is called $7. So it's sort of a marker for him. It's cool. But when I hear this story, it always sort of relate it because Steve and Rock are connected creatively through the years. But let's go back in time and look, should I have said it? Hell no, because I had no idea and didn't know till years later, until these kind of stories came out from, and I don't even know the first time I remember hearing it, but Bruce and others. And I'm like, oh dear Lord. I was shocked. I was shocked in so many ways because Steve, now Conrad, get ready for this. Steve ain't the only first person that I said that to. Matter of fact, it was, you know, you got to laugh about it, because if you don't, you're going to cry over it. My paychecks, and we'll gotten into this, were exactly what others were. We got $40, and this happened in Evansville, Indiana, and we got paid on crappy houses, $40 in Louisville, Evansville, Nashville. My father always tried to pay a little bit better in Memphis because the gross was bigger, and so it was a little bit bigger. But there was a lot of $40 payoffs, a lot. And 7 times 40 is $280. So most guys got about $350 a week on the really crappy weeks. Dutch Mantell is legendary at telling these stories. But to put it in complete context, and not to get too much in the weeds, but in Texas, my father, as we just stated, yes, they were partners in the wrestling school. And my father, yes, Chris, let's work this angle. And then they began to work that angle. And then it turned into Tony Adams was Chris's wife, and Jean Clark, who later became Steve's second wife. They got together. So it was Chris's current wife and ex-wife and Steve, and they had a whole storyline, all that. And then Steve really began.
All right, let's run a timeout right now and give you a heads up. Attention, sports bettors. Has anyone ever given you $1,000 before? Well, Jeff, our guest at this time, is trying to do just that. Welcome to the program, the king of Vegas sports gambling and America's odds maker. It's Wayne Allen Root. Wayne, how are you?
Hey, Conrad. Hey, Jeff. I'm not trying to give you $1,000 free. I'm giving you $1,000 free at vegaswinners.com. That's my website. And I know so many people in the wrestling world love to bet on football. It's an American pastime. It's now legal in most states, a majority of American states. And guys love to bet on football. But I know people get skeptical and cynical. So even though I'm the best in the world, the media calls me the king of Vegas sports gambling, even though I've assembled the best team ever, 21 great sports handicappers at vegaswinners.com, and you have 21 heroes to choose from who all are very good at what they do, I still wanted to give away $1,000 in free winners at vegaswinners.com to make everybody come, register, and do their thing.
Yeah, it seems like you've got it all over at vegaswinners.com. You've got free picks, you've got the best bets, and you're doing it every single day, not just yourself, but 21 champion sports betting experts. Dude, this feels like a deal that's too good to be true. It's fully automated. It's completely private. You'll never even speak to anyone. So go check it out. Get $1,000. Are you listening to that? It's vegaswinners.com. Just log on to vegaswinners.com. That's vegaswinners.com.
To grow as a performer. And then that's when we started, taking the bus. We would drive out from a spot show on Thursday. But anyway, Steve came to Memphis, and my dad, he loved him. And Tom Pritchard, he put Tom and Steve together. So Tom would help Steve as far as learn how to be a heel. I was a babyface. Me and Steve worked around that, around the loop. Many, I don't know how many matches I had with Steve in Tennessee. A lot. I'd say over 100. That's, but you can get in 5 or 6 in a week. So it doesn't take long to get that with we got into tags, and we'll get into all kind of stuff. And Steve was, on the bus and making the rides. And so were me and Steve best friends? No, but it's like I had been around him at this point a year or two. I don't know exactly, but a long time. And to get into the territory sort of psychology, payday was Wednesdays in Evansville. It's just how it worked. Memphis, big show Memphis, everybody was hands on decks. And then on Tuesday is when the bookkeeper would write the checks. And then me or whoever, my grandmother, even if my dad, which my dad rarely went, but somebody would go by the office and pick up the paychecks. It also incentivized guys to make Evansville. It was the worst weekly town by far out of the loop. So that was payday and handing out checks. And Frank Morrell, I rode with him. You know him by another nickname, but Mr. Morrell, no, Frank. We traveled up and down the roads together, and he probably was the first one who would I heard him say that, because guys would come into the territory and the checks would be terrible, but it was what it was. And I can remember Frank getting in the car when we would hear not Steve, but other guys coming up in the territory bitching about everything. And Frank would look over at me and say, last I remember, nobody told him he had to come. He showed up. It was okay. That was sort of the mentality. And obviously my grandfather, Eddie Marlin, had that mentality. You pay what the house is drawn. It's just a whole different business then. You got paid off the house. Nowadays, that isn't, it just doesn't happen. It's TV deals and merchandise and everything. But back then, you couldn't pay what you didn't have. And my dad had a choice. I can overpay the talent of money that's not in the house, and I go out of business, or do I stay in business and continue to hopefully give guys an opportunity to move on? And that's a business decision he made. He wanted to stay in business. So that happened, Conrad. So the checks were handed out, and I can tell you, I probably said that multiple times to different guys. But that night, Steve, and you have to know Evansville, the heels came down one side of the building, babyface came down the other back, but we all dressed in our dressing room downstairs. And Steve, everybody sort of had their different areas of the dressing room. And Steve had his chair set. It was right where I would, or not just me, others had to go, and we had to go up some steps to get to the stage. And Steve was sitting there, and I walked by him, and he had the check in his hand. And I didn't think two things about it when I said it, but I said it, and it obviously stuck with Steve to this day.
In hindsight, do you recognize that it was kind of a shitty thing to say?
Kinda. It's horrible. It was, look, do I have regrets across the board? Oh my God. Of course I do, in many, many ways. But did I say that of malice or spite or gotcha? The thing was, and this is what others knew because they saw it was what it was. You went into it. My dad threw me out of the house when I started working because I came in late seeing my girlfriend. My checks, my dad didn't do it because he wanted to prove to Lawler or anybody else. My dad wanted to discipline me. So he made sure that I got paid what my opponent got paid. That was just literally, that was his rule. Don't pay Jeff a penny more than you pay his opponent. And that was the deal. But yes, I regret saying it. And a lot of other crap back in that day.
It's interesting to go back and relive some of this stuff and see how it all got tangled up. But, we're going to get there. But would you agree that that's probably the first part of the web that we're about to weave here of why Austin had hard feelings on your side?
I can tell you this, and I've said this multiple times on this podcast. Communication is the key to every relationship. I don't care if it's your spouse or a stranger on the side of the road or the homeless guy begging for money and whatever. Everybody has a story behind the story, and the compassion and the understanding that you get with age and wisdom is radical. And so I had residual heat, as a lot of folks like to say, but my father pissed a lot of people off being promoter, not on purpose. It just was what it was. Maybe he did sometimes on purpose, but yes, this incident, had I known, I would have immediately rectified. And here's how a cocky 21-year-old would have rectified it. Hey, Steve, dude, come here. Look at my effing check. Do you really think I meant that? F no. I mean, I'm getting paid exactly what you're getting paid. But guess what I'm doing? I'm getting out there, shaking hands and kissing babies and getting picture money. But I can tell you, Conrad, it is for sure hindsight's 2020. But this definitely started. And this is what's kind of ironic. Look, Steve could have gotten his car at any time and gone back to Texas. So could Undertaker. So could Soul Taker or Papa Shango, Godfather. So could so many other folks that came through the lean times. Dwayne Johnson being one of them. It's not like they signed any contract for my dad to work in USWA. You could go home at any time. And Dutch and Frank Morrell and any Bill Dundee, they all would gig me about that. Hey, man, they can all leave. Those guys decided to stay. But yes, had I known, I would have never said it. But it definitely set the relationship. And again, we had I felt a really good relationship up to this point. I didn't even know it went sideways.
Oh, man. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.